I'm going to introduce Aileen Cassinetto, who is going to be facilitating this program and who helped organize everything to recruit these wonderful poets. Aileen is the poet laureate of our county, San Mateo County. She's the author of The Pink House of Purple Yam Preserves and Other Poems, Traje de Boda, The Art of Salamat, Piano Blues, and Tweet. Her work is on permanent display at the San Francisco Public Library, and she's the publisher of Paloma Press, an independent literary press established in 2016. And we're so honored to have Aileen with us tonight during National Poetry Month to help facilitate these wonderful readings. So I will pass it off to Aileen.
Thank you so much, Fiona. Good evening, everyone. Happy National Poetry Month. So much gratitude to all of you for joining us. Thank you, Redwood City Library, for hosting, and congratulations on being the only institution in California to be nominated for the 2021 National Medal for Museum and Library Service. Tonight, it is my honor and great pleasure to welcome four phenomenal poets: Dilruba Ahmed, Karen Llagas, Naoko Fujimoto, and Angela Narciso Torres. Before we begin, I wish to express our deepest condolences to the family of award-winning writer, musician, and educator, Professor Al Young, who passed away yesterday. Professor Young served as California Poet Laureate from 2015 to 2018. He was a giant among poets. The jazz rhythms in his poetry, his work with youth, and his popularity in rural communities are some of the reasons he has been called an original American voice. Especially in these harrowing times, what a balm to hear the words of our guests this evening. Without further ado, our first reader is Dilruba Ahmed, the author of Bring Now the Angels. Her poems were featured in the New York Times Magazine, the Slowdown, New England Review, Ploughshares, and many others. She is the recipient of the Florida Review's Editors Award, a Dorothy Sargent Rosenberg Memorial Prize, and the Catherine Bakeless Nason Fellowship in Poetry awarded by the Bread Loaf Writers Conference, among others. She holds degrees from the University of Pittsburgh and Warren Wilson College's MFA program for writers. She teaches at Chatham University, Hugo House in Seattle, and Warren Wilson College. Ruba serves on the steering committee for Indivisible Swarthmore, Moving the Needle. Please welcome Dilruba Ahmed.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Aileen and Liz and Fiona, for organizing and hosting this event. I'm so honored to be reading with Karen and Naoko and Angela, and especially thrilled to be celebrating the launch of Angela's second book, What Happens Is Neither. I have my copy here. I have 3 poems to share, and these all come from my second book, which is called Bring Now the Angels. And the first poem that I'll read comes from the first half of the book, which deals primarily with my father's 3-year battle with multiple myeloma. Bring now the angels. Bring now the angels to test your pulse as you sleep. Bring the healer, the howler, the listening ear. Bring an apothecary to mix the tincture. We need the salve, the tablet, the capsule of the hour. Bring sword eaters and those who will swallow fire. Fetch the guardian to flatten the wheelchair, to hoist it toward heaven. The public shuttle awaits the ceaseless trips to the clinic. To the bedside manner, summon witness. This medic's disdain toward patients, the physician's dismissal of pain, and call the druggist again to drug us senseless. Bring a nomad to index our debts, tuck each invoice into broken walls of regret. Call the cleric, the clerk, the messengers divine. Summon someone, collect the prayers, buried or burnt, tied to stones, sunken seas, dunked underwater until all dissolves. Bring now the scribe. Let it be written. There is no shepherd, no Sherpa, no moonlight guide for these, the darkest journeys of our lives. Who will lift the shuttle above the outposts of the living? Who will watch it rise and rise? Who will clear a path among all the wreckage? Who will weave a nest for all the birds of passage? Who will bridge the gap between savage and salvage? Who will sing over wilting stalks, rough husks, silk still gleaming like hair in a dream? My second poem and my third poem are from the second half of the book, which broadens out into other forms of loss, more public forms of loss. And this next one is a retelling of the tale of Jack and the Beanstalk. And it's a piece in two voices. So you'll hear a questioner and a person who's responding. It's called Choke. Was there a beanstalk, a golden egg-laying hen? No, just a magic seed, a courtyard of crooked men. Was there a giant? There must always be a giant. In how many ways did the giant try to choke you? He did not attempt this with his bare hands. In how many ways did the giant try to choke you? He didn't choke me. He choked the competition, flooded the market with magic seeds. Was magic involved? How else could he ensure economic chokehold? How else the power to ban sales of nature's seeds? Was magic involved? How else could he choke off a normal trade flow? How else, in revitalization's name, a new world economy? What life were you doomed to live? Must there always be doom in the developing world? What life were you doomed to live? Lifetime poverty, I was told. How did you pay 1,000 for your first bag of seeds? Alone, 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 alone. Forgive me, my children, my wife, alone. How did you know the seeds were enchanted? They only grow once, my pockets emptied without end. And what of the pesticides? The giant implied the magic seed has little need. Save your rupees, save your children. What did the seeds grow? Nothing every time. How many times did you try? Too many. Then I took my life. Who weeps now over the blighted fields? My wife, my children, my God, what could I do? How many witnessed you drinking the pesticide? On our first date, we secretly strolled and tossed scraps to birds. What did the giant say when you died? From his heights, will he notice the smell of blood? Be he alive or be he dead, I'll grind his bones to make my bread. Who will pay the loans now that you're dead? Please tell the world what is happening here. My final poem is a poem in 7 sections, and it takes inspiration from a childhood toy that some of you might remember. It's the Viewmaster, which is sort of a pair of chunky red binoculars, and you put a slide in and kind of click through to see the various images. And so this poem has 7 sections, or 7 slides, if you will. And apparently now there's a virtual reality version of the Viewmaster. So the title of the poem is Viewmaster Virtual Reality Starter Pack, Mortality Reel. And I should mention that there's a reference to a PAT bus. And those of you who are familiar with Pittsburgh know that when you go to Pittsburgh, it's important to know that there are giant one-ways with 3 to 4 lanes all going in one direction, and 1 lane going counter to all the rest of the traffic, and that lane is for the public transit buses. And so I'll just sort of call out the sections as I read them. And I'd like to say thanks again to Fiona and Liz and Aileen for hosting. And I can't wait to hear everybody read. And thanks to everyone for tuning in and joining us tonight. Viewmaster Virtual Reality Starter Pack, Mortality Reel. 1. A canyon of memory floods as the zip line slips. First bike, first dance, first kiss, broken bone, and more. First love, wedding cake, 2 kids, soft spot pulsing on each newborn's crown. And you, in the blur of greenery and river and craggy rock, you release every spring pulley or counterweight that ever held you back. 2. Slammed by a pat bus, mercy, swift and painless. 7 angels gasped, but you are unperturbed, descending with a steaming non-fat chai tea latte into the counterflow lane from the curb. 3. One moment you leap and dance amid a snow-topped mountain cap backdrop, and the next, without notice, you huddle in bed, doting spouse dropping one perfect tear upon your furrowed brow. Somewhere afar, a sitar twangs and wails, a mysterious virus, rare injury, lightning seizing your whole and healthy spine when you least expect it. No choreography for grief. An entire troop of sequined mourners, it seemed, will fail to bring you back. 4. Legs crossed upon a mat in the dusty outpost, you attain such enlightenment that time slows, giving you full minutes to regard the smooth cartridge hurtling toward your chest. Makes a gel, a web, a balloon stretched to snap. Welcome to bullet time. You were never so much in your life as you were around it, observing it, remarking on it. Given this moment of dead time, you can at last see from every given viewpoint. 5. Overpriced vintage fountain pen pokes through your bag, piercing your backside. Infection follows and you fall to sepsis, bringing credence to claims that daily writing involves risk. 6. Pitch darkness, silence, pure emptiness, a familiar voice in the distance. 7. The truth is, you don't see it coming even there in the wrinkled bed for the 6th, or is it 7th, visit that season. Your beloved covers a bowl of canned peaches, the only taste nowadays that appeals. You want to save it. You plan to eat it later. You wait for your children to arrive at the bedside as they always do, exhausted and deeply happy to see you still there, still alive, bright-eyed, but they know, shrinking. Your face is fuller now with fluids your kidneys retain, which helps everyone forget that your legs, under a stack of sheets and blankets, are nearly fleshless. You know the doctors by name, and they you. You know which nurses will glide in to usher each dumbstruck family member from the room hours after you've passed to the next world. Hours they've spent sobbing, wondering, and pleading. Your chest still rising and falling in rhythm endlessly, it seems, as though the only barrier between you and them were the blissful sleep of recovery, a dream of being lifted with love and carried home. Thank you.
That is so powerful, Ruba. Your book has been really hard to put down, and I think it resonated with me so much because it tackles loss and exile through an intersectional lens. Ruba, please tell us about the genesis of Bring Now the Angels.
What happened was that when I was touring with my first book, I actually was flying home from SFO. I had gone to do a few readings in the Bay Area, and I got the very bad news that my father had become ill, and it turned out that he had rare blood cancer and fought it for the next 3 years. Now to various hospitals and clinics, and all the while I continued writing. But what I found is that I was avoiding the work that really mattered. I didn't have a way to write about what was happening to me and to my family. And so I avoided writing about mortality. I avoided writing about chronic illness. I avoided writing about, this, how we were learning how to navigate the medical system in ways that we couldn't have anticipated. And so I was writing a lot of material, but none of it was getting to the heart of what really mattered. And about a year out from my father's death, something in me just dissolved. And then many of the poems sort of arrived in a flood. And one of the first poems I wrote was a poem called Snake Oil, Snake Bite. And it's actually the last poem in the book, but it was the first poem I wrote that I think started to get at the heart of the matter. And it was, essentially a poem that struggled with mortality. My growing sense of mortality, both as a child of, a terminally ill parent, but also as a parent of young children. And when I wrote that piece, I think that's when I realized that I was starting something new, and that, had made some progress in terms of writing about what really mattered. So that was the beginning.
Thank you for sharing that, Ruba. And what an important critical work. Ruba will be joining us again during the Q&A portion. So if any of our members in the audience would like to ask some questions, just drop it in the chat portions or the Q&A icon. Our next reader is Karen Llagas. Karen holds an MFA from the Warren Wilson Program for Writers and a BA in Economics from Ateneo de Manila. A recipient of a Hedgebrook residency and a Dorothy Sargent Rosenberg Poetry Prize, she divides her time between San Francisco and Los Angeles. She works as a Tagalog translator and a lecturer in Filipino in UC Berkeley. Archipelago Dust is her debut collection, and it won the Philomore Tapio Sr. Memorial Poetry Prize. Please welcome Karen Llagas.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Aileen and Fiona and Elizabeth and fellow poets and friends, Angela, Ruba, and Naoko. I'm going to be reading primarily new poems that I've written in the past maybe 2 years. So please bear with me. I don't see them all finished, but this is where the energy is for me at the moment. So I'm reading mostly new work. Self-portrait as heap and wilt. I am the opposite of saint, though I glimpse her temper. I am less field of ranunculus and more nematodes in the spill of spring. The dirt the monk is scooping more than his calm. I want to be the garden that I find I am the slab of brick and faucet shards topped over by mulch. Not lavender, but snow in summer ground cover. I am the rust that is leaked on grass. Neither metropolis nor old rural, I am each radical, all chemical, open pit mining, canneries that flew back. The second one is called Gratitude Journal. I flinch a little as I reach for it. This practice we do each night in bed, our pillow talk these days, when sending ourselves off to sleep needs less effort than late night sex. Does this flinch expose how little regard I have for joy before I clasp our $1 journal like an amulet? One time I wrote oysters in the balcony, all shucked by you. Some days sleeping in. You always think a task at work, some beautiful fish or other. Tonight is a small entry, the word end. How is the one syllable I carry these days to bridge in me the scared and sacred, to help me sing well enough the everyday swirls and chaos. Here we are doing one thing to further us along, an antidote because we survived by turning towards what destroys. I want to say thank you to my early ancestors, having to kill so much, and now I don't have to, at least not as much, especially not myself, not the tenderest part. This is a poem that I wrote early pandemic. Because April was a cruel month and a cruel year, I switched from a gluten-free to an all-gluten diet. Because God help me if eating cannot be about pleasure in these times. Oh, carbs, induce in me a dreamy state as if I'm back in Florence, falling cliche in love with an Italian chef who will become my husband. Back when he couldn't hold back his tears as he explained, when short of breath, I ran out of the Uffizi, that it was Stendhal syndrome, when I thought it was just dehydration, since drinking had become secondary in our throes of joie de vivre. Back when he said how lucky to have scored someone easily displaced by beauty, and I was naive to declare appetite our currency, as if it was sufficient and infinite. In a pandemic, marriage becomes a marathon we run indoors. These nights he feeds my obsession with wild yeast. Marvel, there's food where there is air, given only water and flour, given time. The next couple of poems are poems that I wrote as I grapple with political situations here and in my native country, and where I grew up in the Philippines. Pre-departure. You're going to a country where you can have a human shape without being such, and so you must first promise. It's a simple enough premise. Learn the phrase, a human is here. It means more than your name. You ask, is there anything we can be but human? Our country is home to forest guardians, duendes, shapeshifters. Tao po. Repeat it, accent on the last syllable. What you say, who you say it to, opens doors. Tao po. You will announce you're a person outside someone's gate, what the visited will hear before they let you in. Our country is a beauty mark on the Pacific's cheek. Everyone you'll meet would have said it, the dirt poor, the dirt wealthy. The paramilitary says it, then waits for the targeted to open their door. Claim your tongue, no matter how flawed. We must shapeshift again, again and again. August in our late Anthropocene. If I can trust fragments like the feast of twigs my dog finds on our morning walk, or the photo shoots I imagine my neighbors walk in and out of all day, all glittered and bronzed, in the purple light of a Los Angeles dusk, how in the city's frame they call up in me a craving to press my cheek on the ground, ask a rained on earth to tell me a secret. But it's summer, and not a single leaf sways out of sync, and water is memory. This year, as in years past, we're scorching the sweet earth. What can we do but practice looking at the sun? And my last poem is called Prayer of the Fragment. Thank you so much again for everybody for being here, for celebrating with us the wonderful second book of my dearest friend, Angela. We've known each other for more than 10 years maybe, and I'm just so thrilled and so moved by your poems and Ruba's and Naoko's, and I'm just so honored to see everybody here and their growth as poets and artists, and how I get so much from your poems that I bring back to my own work. So thank you for sharing this space. I thank you to the other friends and poets in in the webinar. I see them in the chat, and I see them in the participant list. Prayer of the fragment. Lord, if our dreams have holes, I know you still mean for them to be holy. Forgive my distractions, Lord. I can follow the rules, but only for so long before I'm caught again by the traps set by beauty. Today, a green thumb shoots off a dwarfed fig tree, pointing to where the sun would appear any day now. Lord, you promised me your likeness. Forgive my desire to be singular and whole, without holes, understandable if not to others, at least to myself. Forgive my Excel sheet that lists what I owe to the dead. You pass on their message. You belong right here with the living. Forgive me how I lose time, O Lord, how the green thumb of a plump future whisks me away, as if I've hitchhiked to the desert and have walked deep into the canyons, following the song of my name. Thank you so much, everybody.
That is so beautiful. It's always a delight to see you and hear you read, Karen. Like Angela, I've known you for over a decade now, and rereading your earlier poems alongside your newer ones, I've noticed a change in focus and tone. And actually, my question for you is similar to a question I'm just seeing from Aloy from the Philippines. His question is, how has the pandemic influenced your poetics? Have your more recent poems become more socio-political in context, or have they become more deeply personal?
First, I'm really a slow writer, and it took me a long time to accept that about myself. And it took me a long time to realize that what writing and poetry is asking of me is to not to kind of bring everybody along that is in me, that is slow, and the part of me that's vulnerable, and the part of me that I don't feel is as effective or efficient in the world as the teacher part or the organizer part or all of those things. And so it's a yes and a yes. They've become more sociopolitical, and they've become more deeply personal the more I realize that I am a person that is in the world, and a person that is a historical person, and a deeply private person, but a person that's moving in the world anyway. So what happens in the pandemic, as I'm sure and so many of us have in artists and writers, that at least a child part of me was so giddy about having all this time and not having to make up excuse not to see people, to be, oh yes, I have this time to write. But in this context of anxiety and depression and isolation and just deep grief, right, for everything that's happening, and the social unrest and the political upheavals and reckoning, and the recent, it just keeps continuing, even with the AAPI hate that we are now grappling with, and that we couldn't quite separate from our own work. And so all of that takes time, and it takes, I needed to give it the space, as Ruba was also talking about how it meant to write about loss, and I think I needed to give myself the permission to engage with it sideways, to not ask of our writing more than it wanted to give at that moment, but to engage with it nonetheless, just as you will not ask a seedling to give you the fruit before it is time. But so I knew that in the beginning of the pandemic, there was one mantra that I went to right away, which is, whatever happens, please put yourself in the path of poetry, of poets, of art and writing. And I don't know why I formulated that way, but I think that saved me. So that allowed me to just take the humility to reach out to communities, to form communities that I could, and to kind of nourish what I could back into other writers and other poets. So sorry for my rambling response, but I'm I'm kind of thinking about these questions every day. Yeah, thank you.
Karen. Thank you, Karen. That's really helpful, especially for writers like us who don't produce work quickly or as often. Our next reader is Naoko Fujimoto. Naoko was born and raised in Nagoya, Japan. Her recent work appears or is forthcoming in Poetry, Kenyon Review, Prairie Schooner, and many more. She is the author of Glyph, Graphic Poetry Equals Trans Sensory, forthcoming from Tupelo Press, and Where I Was Born, published by Willow Books, as well as 3 chapbooks. She is an associate and outreach translation editor at Rhino Poetry. Please welcome Naoko Fujimoto.
Thank you very much. I'm behind the camera tonight. So tonight I would like to share like fantastic night with everybody. And thank you very much for beautiful night with me. And thank you very much, Fiona, Aileen, Elizabeth, Karen, Ruba, and congratulations on your new book, Angela. I love you so much. So tonight I'm going to read 2 poems, 1 short poem and 1 long poem. So first, just unfinished graphic poems I'm trying to finish while I'm going to read this poem. Let's see. How does it work? Sakura, Sakura on the radio. Guitarist played an old Japanese folk song. Cherry blossom shut for a long time. Sudden gray pink petals burst. Yellow stems covers the streets when I walked through at Tokugawa Park. I pick up the blossoms and place them in telephone books before being ruined by raindrops. I was careful to touch those now transparent, beautiful existences. I handle the best to my mother. A couple of snowflakes landed on the windshield. The lyric I forgot. Well, just looks like a bunch of fireworks. Well, this was my first time. So let's see. Next time may be better when my new book comes. Okay, laugh, ha ha ha. So next, I am going to read my graphic poem. So Angela and I went to Japan together in 2019. So before Angela I went to Rikuzen Takata. The city was unfortunately destroyed by tsunami on March 11, 2011. So this poem was inspired by the city, also people I met. Offshore of Rikuzen Takata. My name is Naoko, one of whose kanji is ho, the spikes at the top of wheat, maize, rice, and Japanese pampas grass. The other kanji means rapeseed blossoms. They are all like autumn ginkgo leaves. How yellow I am. From field to field, so bright, in Rikuzen Takata, where I first visit, I see how my name's color exists. From here do I see the shore dipped around like an S shape. 1,000 or 2 are lots of bodies drifted ashore First some, then a lot. And then fragments like pebbles, like parts of twigs lifting up. Stardust washed away by the Milky Way. After a sudden blackout, knocked out the lights. It is so easy to destroy a thing or things, like tearing old postcards. Stamps that still contain your saliva. I have been meeting people, including your niece, who you have never met. Do you still remember feeling her first kick under her mother's skin, eating late-night ochazuke? With the softest seaweed Mr. H used to grow. You know, Mr. H is still missing, but I'm chewing on descendants of his buds. With your niece, whose front baby teeth are coming out. That day, the sea water went backwards. From an irrigation canal, the bottom of the shore appeared. Then the tsunami shook off 300 years of dust from the pine tree needles. And after we all understood, when shoveling up our roofs, picking up things that did not belong to the field, earth. Don't take away our future whole. The waves like golden ripples by the wind from the shore. Stars, let the sea be a cradle, so gentle around. The magnificent concrete walls, where humans still believe we can win over nature. From here, I feel no sea breeze. Cannot see long sticks where Mr. H used to harvest his seaweed. So I scale the wall with your niece. She and I have a race to the one surviving pine tree, and she runs circles around me, smiling. Her left eye squints like you. I feel I know you, among others. Dear ocean, please let them know I want to meet again. So this sketchbook, Angela and I went to stationery center and then in Tokyo. Okay, so thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Naoko. Looking at your stunning graphic poems, I'm curious to know what your early models or inspirations were and how they've changed over time.
Yes, that's a very good question. So my inspiration came from when I was visiting artist at MassMoCA, Massachusetts Contemporary Art Museum. So there's so many Anselm Kiefer's art. So Anselm Kiefer is a contemporary artist from Germany, and he uses concrete and mixing rusty materials. His pieces are gigantic, like warehouse size. Also, San Francisco MoMA they are great collection of his collection there. So after this quarantine period, you may visit there to discover Anselm Kiefer. So when I see his art, I wondered if I translate my poems written on a paper into words and images with Japanese traditional art format, emaki, picture scroll format. So emaki is reading right to left in a picture scroll, but for my audience, majority of my audience uses iPhone, smartphone, so up and down, vertical. So I adapted those 21st century's format into my graphic poem. So now I have been creating a graphic poem constantly for last 4 years, 5 years. So my aesthetic is true to myself. I'm more comfortable being Asian woman from Japan and writing in the second language. And then also celebrating as I am actually now really happy. Finally, I'm happy about being me, writing in both language, Japanese and English. And I am very thankful. And especially this confidence comes from having a good friend. Angela, she's one of my good friends, and she always encouraged me. And among other friends with tonight. So thank you very much. Back to you.
Thank you, Naoko. Thank you for sharing your brilliant work. Speaking of Angela, she is our final reader. Angela Narciso Torres is the author of What Happens Is Neither, released by Four-Way Books this year, and Blood Orange, which is winner of the 2013 Willow Books Literature Award for Poetry. Recent work appears or is forthcoming in Poetry, Missouri Review, Quarterly West, Cortland Review, Poetry Northwest, among others. A graduate of Warren Wilson MFA program for writers and Harvard Graduate School of Education, Angela has received fellowships from Breadloaf Writers Conference, Illinois Arts Council, and Ragdale Foundation. She received first prize in the Yates Poetry Prize, and New City Magazine named her one of Chicago's Lit 50, who really books in Chicago. Born in Brooklyn and raised in Manila, she currently resides in San Diego. Angela serves as a senior and reviews editor for Rhino Poetry. Please welcome Angela Narciso Torres.
Thank you so much, Aileen. Thank you, Liz and Fiona, for creating this space for us to be together here tonight with three of my dearest and most admired poets on this planet. I'm just so, my heart is full. It's full to bursting right now, hearing your wonderful words and Naoko's beautiful images. And I just can't tell you, I just want you all to understand that each of these women here tonight, including you, Aileen, have inspired me in countless ways in every single stage of my life as a writer, from the early beginnings until just today, in fact. Yes, and I think you can all see why these women have inspired me and have contributed so deeply to my growth as a poet. I also want to thank each of you out there in the ether. I can't see your faces, but I know that there's so many choices of poetry events this month, and you've chosen to be here. So thank you for making the time to be with us. I'll be reading 3 poems from the book and then a couple of newer pieces. And if there's time, maybe one last poem from the book. So at its core, the book, What Happens Is Neither, is both an homage and an elegy to my parents, whom we lost 2 years ago, my mother to Alzheimer's and my father to metastatic cancer and a broken heart a week later. And any loss forces you to look back, to remember, to bear witness, and to record. So a lot of these books, poems in this book are memories and really a staunch witness bearing of my mother's disease and her decline, but also a lot of poems that try to reinvent the self after loss and to rediscover delight. I'd like to start with a poem I wrote during the earlier stages of my mom's dementia, when I still felt I could capture everything. Obviously, we can't, language is inadequate, but I did my best. My mother was our family storyteller and historian, and somehow I felt that it fell to my shoulders to continue on this tradition. It just came naturally, I suppose. This is Sundowning for my mother, Carmen. The sweetest meat clings to the bone, my mother says, knifing her steak. Carmen, silver spade on my tongue. Mahjong nights, her mother and father gone, she cried herself to sleep, blamed in the morning for her mother's losing hand. Unlucky tears. The sweetest meat, she begins at dinner, tearing off a drumstick. What will she recall by morning? Named for Our Lady of Mount Carmel, she pinned brown scapulars under our shirts, wet stamps that cleaved to our backs. Carmen, prayer on the breath. Amid potted ferns, she works a jigsaw puzzle. Bizet on the radio. Unable to sleep, she made me lie next to her. My brothers clambered the moonlit trees. My legs twitched, a broken clock. Her kisses are guava and rust. She sings kundimans her mother sang. Sampaguita, dahil sayo, saan ka man. Sunday morning, puzzle pieces strewn on yesterday's news. Maria Callas on the phonograph. Carmen, citrine fire. When she plays the piano, the lovebirds fall silent. Alabaster eggs tremble in glass bowls. Afternoons, she woke with an urge to bite the brown loaf of my arm. The marks on my flesh faded by sundown. The sweetest meat clings, she insists, peels a mango. Amber rivers trace her elbows. A trail of l'air du temps wafts in her wake. I follow it to her room, dab the scent on my wrists and throat. Evenings, she sang kundimans. Hating gabi, nasaan ka, Irog? Carmen, song of the mangosteen moon. Before you go, I want to give you something. She hands me a thimble painted with a map of Cuba. You've never been to Cuba. In the dream, a sister pours rosary beads into her cupped hands. Upon waking, a dead wasp curled in her palm. So, as I mentioned, this book is as much about loss as about how we redefine or reinvent ourselves after loss, especially after a loss as huge as that of a parent or parents. This book has a number of self-portraits in that vein, and this is one of them. And I love how it's actually in conversation with Karen's self-portrait of heat and wilt. And I'm really pleased that I chose to read this tonight. I love how that happens, just kind of magically. Self-portrait as revision. I am the storm-torn palm frond draped on the balcony wall. I am the cumin in the soup stirring the lentils' sleep. I am the olive's skeletal pit, the cat's paw, the thistle spear. The clay in the kiln cast into a small flask to hold centuries of musk. For weeks I do not sing, though I gush. An underground rill carving blindly to the sea. I succumb to thunder, the urchin's sting, the softness of moss. This is my prayer. I'm driftwood, parched in white heat, soaked in January rain. A seashell pressed to its pale grave. The wind rises, rewriting the hymnals of dunes. I am hurricaned, worn smooth again. The next is one of the prose poems in the book. They're not many, but in this poem, I wanted to read a poem that kind of harked back to my childhood, where there was so much delight in just being enveloped in a mother's love and in her overwhelming presence. My mother had a presence that filled an entire room. And I was the opposite. I was a really shy child, but because my mother was that way, it gave me kind of a safe place to hide in social gatherings and to just retreat into my observations and my thoughts. And maybe that's why I became a writer or a poet. It's a useful stance for a writer anyway. This is called Disappearing Act. Mother chose the dress, mint green with puffed sleeves, white starched collar, electric pleat skirt, lace socks that chafed my ankles. At the party, she made me kiss everyone. Aunts reeking of joy by Jean Patou, sway-backed uncles cradling beers, my grandmother smoking clove cigarettes between puffs of her inhaler. Someone was laughing loudly. Someone played a ukulele. From a far table, the rumble of mahjong tiles being shuffled by a quorum of matrons, their lacquered nails clicking, wreathed in cigarette smoke. Cousins wrestled on the scorched lawn. A small place behind my ribs felt tender, making it hard to breathe. I wanted most of all to lie in the pink shell of my room, a book within reach. Someone passed around colorful sandwiches in the shape of card suits, diamonds, spades, clubs. Someone carried a tray of fizzy drinks, handing them to the grown-ups. I imagined sneaking a sip and getting smaller and smaller like Alice, then crawling into mother's conch evening bag, the clasp closing overhead with a satisfied click. Mother whispered a greeting to a woman in a floral pink kaftan. I vanished into their murmurs and shadows, a cloud of camphor and carnations. So moving on, I want to read a newer poem. So when I was writing this past year during the pandemic and after my parents passed, it was really difficult. I wasn't writing a lot. And what helped me when the words wouldn't come was to read. And I read Barth's Morning Diary. So this French philosopher, when his mother died, he just started journaling every day for 2 years. And they're like short little snippets, just cataloging the surge, the ebb and flow of grief. And so much of this book spoke to me. I started copying lines down, and then I thought this can be a cento, a poem using borrowed lines. And then I thought I could use the pantoum form because the pantoum uses repetitive lines, which kind of mimic the obsessiveness of grief and the recurring thoughts. So this is a cento pantoum using lines from Ronald Barthes' Morning Diary, M-O-U-R-N, Morning Diary. Yeah, I'll just read it now. Morning Diary. Morning, a cruel country where I'm no longer afraid. The formal beginning of the long bereavement. This terrifies me. I know my morning will be chaotic. The formal beginning of the long bereavement, 18 months for a mother, a father. I know my morning will be chaotic. We don't forget, but something vacant settles in. 18 months for a mother, a father. Each of us has his own rhythm of suffering. We don't forget, but something vacant settles in. Suffering like a stone around my neck, deep inside me. Each of us has his own rhythm of suffering. This morning, the offer of lightness. Suffering like a stone around my neck, deep inside me. I ask for nothing but to live in my suffering. This morning, the offer of lightness. For the first time, I decide to wear a colored scarf. I ask for nothing but to live in my suffering. I limp along through my morning. For the first time, I decide to wear a colored scarf. First Sunday morning without her. I limp along through my morning. Henceforth and forever, I am my own mother. First Sunday morning without her. Everyone is extremely nice, yet I feel entirely alone. Henceforth and forever, I am my own mother. From now on, my death would kill no one. Everyone is extremely nice, yet I feel entirely alone. This terrifies me. From now on, my death would kill no one. Mourning, a cruel country where I am no longer afraid. So I think there's a time for one last poem, and I want to end with a poem of delight. This is not in the book. It's actually in this newly published anthology, How to Love the World, which I love this book. It's like an antidote to all the wreckage that we see in the world that we've been seeing the past year every day in the news. It's poems of love, of gratitude and hope, and it's edited by James Cruz. The poem I have in here is actually a love poem, both to my dog and to my husband, ostensibly to the dog, but really to the husband. I think that our pets are the unsung heroes of the pandemic. Mine has just been a lifesaver. My therapy dog, I call her my emotional support, but she's also my spirit animal. For some reason, I wrote this in the I used the his pronoun, he, his for the dog here. I don't know, it was an artistic choice I made, but it's really to my dog Phoebe, who uses she, her, and yeah, those are her pronouns. Amores perros. Sometimes I love you the way my dog loves his all beef chew bone, worrying the knuckled corners from every angle, mandibles working like pistons. His eyes glaze over with that faraway look that says he won't quit until he reaches the soft marrow. His paws prop the bone upright. It slips. He can't clutch it tight enough, bite hard enough. A dog's paws weren't meant for gripping. And sometimes I love you the way my dog brushes his flank nonchalant against my legs, then flops on the floor beside me while I read or watch TV. His heft warms. One of us is hungry, the other needs to pee, but we sit, content as wildflowers. Minutes pass, hours. Thank you so much.
Angela, those are gorgeous, gorgeous poems. Your latest collection, What Happens Is Neither, is a testament to your mettle as a poet, how you draw on memory and legacy with such remarkable detail. What was the most difficult part of completing this manuscript?
So I've been thinking about that question, and really the most difficult part was getting started. After my parents passed away, a few months after, I got an invitation from Martha Rhodes of 4A Books to just take a look at what I had. And I said, yeah, there's poems there, but I really wasn't thinking I have a book. I have enough poems maybe for a book, but I wasn't thinking I have a book to submit. So I said, yes, I'll send you something, thinking maybe 2-3 months from now. It really wasn't in my field of vision at the time. This is where Naoko comes in. I mentioned in passing in a phone call, I said, Naoko, I'm really depressed about my parents, and this is all going on. Well, by the way, Martha Road, blah, blah, blah. And yeah, I don't know if I can do it, but she goes, are you crazy? You will write that book now. You will submit the manuscript at the deadline that she wanted it. She said, put your poems together, send them to me in 3 days, and you will write 2 new poems about your parents, and I will help you. I will help you put this together. And that's what she did. That's what we did. And it became really my grief workout, all the energy that had gone into the mourning and the crying over and the sleepless nights went into ordering and fixing up this manuscript. And I realized that, yes, there is a book in this, even though they're from disparate parts of my life. The most difficult part really was just trying to see how they were all connected, and they are. And I think that our anxiety about how our body of work coheres as writers is really an artificial one, because we are using the same lens. It's our sensibility. We use the same aesthetic, we draw from the same bank of images, no matter where, if we're writing about the loss of a parent, a child moving away to college, losing an unborn child because of a miscarriage, the loss is loss. And yeah, that's how I overcame the fear of starting that book.
Thank you for sharing that, Angela. I know your fellow readers this evening, Ruba, Naoko, and Karen, are also longtime friends. So I'd like to invite them to ask you questions about your book. Ruba, maybe you can start first.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, gorgeous readings, all of you. I feel so moved. I hope I can be articulate with my questions for Angela. I have in my hands here an exquisite chapbook that I received that's signed a year back, almost to the day, April 20th, with Angela's signature inside. And very thrilled to have in my possession now a copy of your book. So your full-length collection, I should say. So I would love to hear you talk a little bit about the relationship between these two books. I know you've talked a bit about how the book came together with Naoko's encouragement and support. But I'd love to hear you just talk a bit about that process of, coming to this collection, this beautiful chapbook, and then making your way here. And I have another question if there's time, which was something you started talking about a bit. My question is related to the difficult material that your work grapples with. And I wondered how, what were the supports and strategies and structures that helped you find your way into the book? So I know you mentioned, this idea of sort of journaling and starting, and I'd be curious to hear if there were any other strategies that helped you kind of get access to that difficult material.
Great questions. Thank you, Ruba. In terms of the chapbook and its relationship to the full-length book, the chapbook, the simple answer is the chapbook is actually a subset of the full-length book, but really it was the yeast or the kernel or as Naoko likes to say, it's the spine of the full-length book. The chapbook was really focused on my mother's decline through Alzheimer's and her eventual succumbing to the disease. So it's really like the concentrated form of a book on loss. It's only 24 pages, I think. And so how to incorporate that into a larger work that has poems about long marriage and children getting older, moving to college, and dogs and gardening. It didn't seem intuitive at first. And when I looked at the title, What Happens is Neither, which goes on to say, what happens is neither the end nor the beginning, I thought, it's really a book about time. There's so much ending and so much beginning at any given point in our life. Everything can be construed as a beginning or an ending, but it's neither of those things. It's just life. And all of life fits in a book of poetry. I mean, that's really the only way I know how to make poetry, is to make it from my life. And so I started to look at the book in a different way. I started to look at it as these poems are the stuff of my life in this given moment. And some of them, my mother died on May 29, 2019, but we've been losing her for the past 12 years. So I was writing these poems on loss since 2012, maybe, when she was first diagnosed. So yeah, it just kind of fell into place and I kind of felt bad that people who bought the chapbook would be reading the entire thing again in my new book. But I thought, no, it's a different way of seeing those poems. And it's like, those Japanese towels that you put in a bowl of water and they bloom suddenly and become, I don't know, a dinosaur or a lotus flower. I feel like our poems are like that. They can be in a chapbook and you put them in the solution of a much larger work and they mean something different. And that's how I decided I would make those two books kind of relate to each other. As for the strategies, I love this poem by this quote from Henri Cole that I heard at a reading. He said, "A poem is like a genie in a bottle. The bottle makes the genie stronger." And I quote that poem all the time because I cannot emphasize the necessity of using form. The pantoum, the sonnet, the villanelle, even the haiku, or even just counting syllables. Like sometimes I would just alternate 9-11, 9-11 syllables. To have that constraint when you're dealing with really difficult material helps us to kind of get away from the gushing and the overwriting and just really putting what's essential. I rely a lot on the words of nonfiction writers because I tend to be very image driven and narrative driven in my poetry. And what's missing is the rhetoric, the assertion that Karen, you're so good at, and Ruba, you're so good at in your poetry, although you're also very image rich, and Naoko very image rich too, but you're just more, I think, assertive, whereas I just rely so much on imagery. So yeah, I have these. I've written poems using D.H. Lawrence's letters, using Home, A Short History of an Idea, where I'll intersperse words of nonfiction with my own words. The Journal of Catherine Mansfield, the Journal of Diary of Virginia Woolf, all of these have been like books by my bedside, and I'll see a line, I'm like, oh, that's a great line to put in a poem. So it's like, if the thinking cerebral part isn't working naturally, then it comes from here. There's a lot of smart people there, and we can steal and borrow their words. So yeah, that's some of the things that I do. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you, Angela. We're learning so much about craft from this discussion. Naoko, before you ask Angela a question, there's a question for you actually from Christina Newhard. How important is the text in reading your work? Could we read your work visually? What's your thought process on combining the two?
That's for Naoko, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Where did she go?
Well, maybe Karen, would you like to ask Angela?
Yes, as we're waiting for Naoko, but I'm so happy to hear of your process, Angela, because I'm just so thrilled, right? I mean, poets always love hearing about how other poets work. And my question to you is, because I've known you for a while now, and I want to frame the question as, what's an imperative or an advice you would give to your younger poet self? And maybe you can give it to your 20-year-old self, to your 25-year-old, to 35. I don't know. I know you're only 35, but you know what I mean. In different points of your life when you're writing.
Okay, well, let's round that down to about in my 30s, I started writing poetry, and I was writing really badly then, but at the same time, I was so focused on getting published. It's like I needed some sort of affirmation from the outside world that you're writing well. And I wish I could tell myself back then that it really doesn't matter when or how much you're published. What matters is that you write what matters most to you. Eventually I started doing that. I write about my family. I write about my children, my mother. I write about me as a mother, as a daughter. And I wish someone had told me that it is okay to write heartfelt things. It's okay to write things that make you cry. And it's okay to cry on the page even. It's okay to risk sentimentality. What I was hearing back then was, you have to be more elliptical. You have to be edgy. You have to be less narrative, less predictable. I had a publisher even say, don't bother sending that to Express. We only publish elliptical works. Your manuscript is just too narrative, too predictable, whatever. And I wish I had known then to trust that. And I did, because I had other people who said, your work has an unguarded tenderness that the poetry world will probably eat up. They'll probably like tear apart, but you need to trust it and keep going and it's a finished book, just keep sending it. And that was Blood Orange. So yeah, just write what means the most to you, because whatever you feel most deeply and value most deeply will resonate with other people, because those are the undercurrents that make us all human, no matter the color of our skin. or, you know, where we live in the world. It's it's what makes us human.
So true. Thank you, Angela. I see that Naoko is back. Naoko, before you ask Angela a question, there's actually a question for you from Christina Newhard. She's asking if we can read your work, if it's important to read the text in your work, or if you can read it visually, and what your thought process is on combining the two, graphic part and the text.
Thank you very much for asking a question. And I'm sorry, I think I had a internet connection issue. So my theme is graphic poetry equal transsensory. So I would like people to sense, not only listening to words, also looking at the art visually. So to enjoy, you know, all the stimulate all the sensories.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So my process is, there's so many. So this is a good question, but it's kind of a big question. So in the short, so my earlier works is I translate into words and images. I select words and images, and you see the graphic poems and read sentences, read lines, and then also associate images with it. And so today's work, especially offshore of Rikuzen Takata, it's actually all the words is in this graphic form. And this also will be available if you are curious, if you would like to order. Going to be will be published in North American Review. It is forthcoming October-ish, autumn. So if you are wondering what's the exact words, please purchase North American Review. Thank you.
Thank you, Naoko. Do you have any questions for Angela?
Yes. So Angela, well, I know about your manuscript and the tutorial. So, well, my question is, like tonight poetry reading, Rhubarb and Karen's first draft, it looks so easy to compose poems, but it's not. Same as Angela, your work, writing about family. And so my question is, so many people try to write about family, but some of them may have a difficult time to describe about their family into poems, translate into poems. So what is your secret to write about your family in poems?
Well, I don't think there's a secret or like a special technique that I use. I feel like it was more of a directive or an innate tendency that I have. I think that some people naturally are drawn to writing stories and reflections about family life, and some are not. I remember Rick Barrett saying that he finally was able to write poems about his family in his third book. And that was like, wow, I feel like I keep repeating myself and writing about my family. I wish I could do other poems instead of writing about my family. But in the end, I think about Sharon Olds and how she said, I'm in my 60s. I'm still doing what I do. I still write about my family. And she won the Pulitzer Prize. So I think looking back, where that impulse came from, my mother, as I said, is a storyteller, and she was the historian of our family. My dad was a photographer, and he documented our lives by taking photos. And so there's words, there's images, and what other way can we put those both together than, poetry, because poetry uses both the immediacy of a photograph, but also the discursiveness of words, but limited, right, to a kind of the immediacy of a moment or even a feeling distilled. So yeah, I feel like it was just something that came naturally. And the craft part, well, whatever your material is, the craft learning craft will make it better. But I would say to anyone trying to write about their family to just write it out in white heat and then edit later in cold blood, as one of my first English teachers said, because the stories are all there waiting to be written, and only you can tell your story in your way. And especially for us, AAPI writers who have been silenced for way too long, and women too, our stories matter. And we don't have to erase the I from our poems. Who's saying we shouldn't put the I? It's about time we put our eyes back, our letter I, back in the poem. We need to hear that I. We need to hear those voices. So yeah, don't be afraid to tell your stories. You don't need permission. They're valuable and they must be heard.
Christina Newhart was just saying amen, and I second that. Thank you all for this very engaging and healing reading and conversation. My last question is for all of you, and shout out to local poet Kevin Madrigal for this question. What gives you hope? Maybe Ruba can answer first.
Sure. Well, I'd like to just say thanks again for inviting me to be part of this. It's really been an amazing evening. I think what gives me hope, there are at least 3 things that give me hope. One is we've talked a lot about family tonight. My family gives me hope, especially when I think about my parents and all that they endured, moving here as immigrants from what is now Bangladesh, all that they sacrificed and in many ways suffered, and but also, all the ways in which they endured, and all the gifts that they've passed on to me and my siblings and to my kids. Being connected to an amazing network of writers and just talking about poetry, being immersed in poetry has really given me hope, especially during the pandemic. Staying connected over poetry, and my own kids, just looking at them and thinking about their future, even though we're in a very challenging time. I think there are so many wonderful things happening, in the midst of all the challenges that we're all facing. So I feel a lot of hope for them and for their future.
Thank you, Ruba. What about you, Karen?
Everything that Ruba said. But what also gives me hope are my students, are activists here in the Bay Area, in the US, also in the Philippines, and in many places of the world, in Burma, that is, standing up and letting their lives matter, and making sure that future generations will have lives that they can live in and thrive. It really gives me hope to be among young people. I have a son, I have a stepson who's turning 18, and I have students who are in their 20s, and the way they're speaking and their fierceness, but also their kindness and vulnerability. And so, Aileen, I'm so thrilled at the work you're doing for the youth poet laureate program in the Bay Area, because I've learned so much from young people, and every time I do something with them, I take more than what I've given them, I feel. So, and I love, it gave me hope that in this past year and a half, creative people have found creative ways to connect, and relationships that matter continued to grow and thrive, and then relationships that needed to fall away just fell away, so thank you.
Thank you, Karen. What about you, Naoko?
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me tonight. Hope is to live. So let's live together, survive together. I know it's a little bit bad out there sometimes, but we can go through together.
Beautifully said. And finally, Angela.
Well, it's hard to think of something more than what you've already all said, but I think that what I'll say echoes most of what you've said, in that I don't need to look further than my 3 sons, who are inspiring me every day to be a better writer, a better human being, a better artist. they're all artists in their own way. The eldest is a graphic designer. The middle child is, he writes video game programs in Redwood City. And the youngest is into animation and music. And I see their friends, I hear their conversations about art, and it just inspires me how the youth is really like embracing art as salvation, really, through these times, whether it's dance, painting, whatever. And also their conversations about the political situation and social issues. They're just so much more woke and conscious and aware, so much more than I was in my 20s. And that gives me so much hope for the future, that these people will be the leaders of our future. And lastly, nature gives me hope. Just taking a walk with my dog, looking up at the sky, realizing that, yes, there is a sky, there's a blue sky up there. Spring comes back. I know that sounds cheesy, but it's just the everyday renewal of nature. You know, everything just keeps going on despite whatever happens is neither the end nor the beginning.
Thank you, Angela. This evening has been full of hope. It's a gift. It's so moving and inspiring to hear you all talk about your work and what gives you hope. I think it helps us hold on to each other and to our dreams a little bit longer. Thank you so much, Ruba, Naoko, Karen, and Angela for joining us this evening. Friends, if you enjoyed our event, I hope you will support our poets by checking out their books. Bring Now the Angels by Dilruba Ahmed, Archipelago Dust by Karen Llagas, Glyph Graphic Poetry Equals Chance Sensory by Naoko Fujimoto, and What Happens Is Neither by Angela Narciso Torres. Thank you all for joining us. Good night and stay safe. Back to you, Fiona.
Thank you so much, Aileen, and to Ruba, Angela, Karen, and Naoko for those really moving and beautiful poems. I know I feel more hopeful having listened to you and learned more about your work. And I also wanted to acknowledge the efforts of one of our other coworkers who helped us put this event together tonight, Maria Diaz Slocum, who wasn't able to be here with us. She was on leave